Hi, this is Mark Arnold with another episode of Fun Ideas Podcast, and I have a special guest today who's written a book called Your Mind: The Infinite Universe of Yoko Ono. Now, some people might say Yoko Ono, uh-oh, but I am a fan, and so I'm very happy to have you here. This is Madeline Bocaro. How are you?
Great. Thank you for having me.
So I guess the obvious question, because people pick on Yoko Ono sometimes undeservedly, but how and when did you become a fan of her?
I saw a picture of her in Time magazine when I was 10 years old in 1968.
Mhm.
And I laughed at it because she was standing in front of one of her films, and it was the Bottoms film where she had, behinds walking on a treadmill. So I thought, wow, this is cool. This is an adult who's doing something really kooky and fun. And I kept the picture and I still have it. And within months, I started hearing that she was with John Lennon. And I had gotten the White Album and I was walking around school with it. And people were saying they wanted to peel off the white cover because they're saying John and Yoko are naked under that. I'm like, no, that's, that's something else. But yeah, I just loved them right from the beginning. I was so happy she was with John, and I started seeing her on the news with him and the bed-ins and all the shenanigans they were going through together. And I never had any problem with her. I never knew people were hating on her until later on when I started hearing it.
Interesting. Now let's talk a little bit about that bit of time before she was with John Lennon. I mean, you appreciated her for the Bottoms film. Did you know anything else about Yoko at that time?
No, not at that time, but
Huh.
quickly I started reading more about her and found out she was doing art before she met John. And the reason John met her was because he was fascinated by her work.
Mhm.
And yeah, and then as the years went by, I started reading more about her childhood and what a crazy childhood she had. She came from the wealthy family of billionaire bankers and um, had to live through the war when she was 12 years old, evacuated with her siblings to countryside and foraging for food. And, then I realized the similarities. Like John was abandoned by both of his parents pretty much, and Yoko's parents were socialites. Her mother was a socialite, her father was a banker, and she didn't even meet her father till she was almost 3 years old.
Mm.
So she was very, very lonely growing up. And as she got older, she started rejecting all of their wealth and prestige. She didn't relate to any of it. She just was driven to do her artwork. And
Mhm.
that's what she did.
Mhm. Now, was information, I know nowadays with the internet you can get information anywhere, but at the time when you started learning more about her, was it easy to find information prior to her years with John Lennon, or how did you discover that
It
information?
wasn't really, but John would speak about it,
It's true.
a lot. So I started looking up names of people that she collaborated with, like her first husband's name was Toshi Ichinagi, and he was avant-garde, but he became a very, very famous composer in Japan until he passed away a couple of years ago. He was
Hmm.
still working. And then John Cage, of course, I started looking into
Hmm.
his experiments with sound and um, yeah, everybody they hung out with, they would go and visit other artists like Charlotte Moorman, who put together all the avant-garde art festivals, like a meltdown sort of a platform where all these artists could present because there was nowhere in the city at the time. So
Hmm.
yeah, I slowly learned and grew with it. And that's why I had all this material for the book because I was saving all these articles and interviews all my life and saw it unfold in context of the times. And I wasn't even aware I was writing a book. I just had all this material. And during COVID, my boyfriend gave me software and he said, you can put all your Word documents in here and see what you have because I've been writing all my life. And lo and behold, I had a book which took me 2 more years to put together and organize.
Hmm.
So here it is. I mean, I don't think anyone can start day one. Yoko Ono was born and make it interesting or anything. And she's 91
Right.
this year, and she's been working almost every day of that life,
Mm.
7 decades at least.
Right. Now, This is your first book, correct? That's what I
Yes.
read on your website. And prior to this, tell us a little about yourself and what led you to write this book.
I was working, I was a rock fan as a kid, as a little kid. And when you're that young, you have all the time in the world to absorb all this information and you live with it and it's ingrained in you. So I have all this insight. And then as I got older, there was a club near my home called My Father's Place, and a lot of great, great bands played there. So I
Mhm.
would just go to the parking lot during the sound check at 4 o'clock, and I would meet all these people and I'd get let in, and it was just fabulous. And I was a kid, so they were like probably just humoring me,
Yeah.
but I got to really, really ask them a lot of questions about the music and watch the rehearsals and sound checks. So that was great. I met Iggy Pop, I met Lou Reed, I met the New York Dolls, Debbie Harry, the Ramones, just everybody that I loved. So then I started writing for magazine CMJ. It
Mm.
was College Media Journal, and all the college stations reported their playlists every week. So that was really cool. I got to do concert reviews and album reviews, and that was fun. And then when my parents moved to Florida when I was 25, I needed a job that paid more than the writing job. So I did conventional jobs, but I was always writing on the side, whether it was for a publication or freelance, whatever. And finally, when I retired a few years ago, I was able to just do this, and I have a
Cool.
blog now, madelinex.com,
Mhm.
and I write about all the things I love.
Very cool. Going back to Yoko then, how big of a fan were you? Were you so much so that you collected all of her albums as they came out and
Oh,
everything, and
definitely.
tried to see her in concert? Because I know she didn't tour too much until later, but and I assume, have you met her? Like,
Yes.
and have you met her to the point where, like talking face to face like we are, or just,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I met her after, well, I did get all the albums that they came out. In fact, when the singles came out, I remember being in a mall in a Macy's, and the jukebox was there, and it said John Lennon single, and it said Why, Mother, Mother, and the B-side was Yoko's Why. And I
right.
had to hear Yoko's song, and I put that on. Jukebox was rumbling. It was the best thing ever. Then when Double Fantasy came out, I was working at CMJ and our speakers were broken. And the only way to hear anything was with headphones. And we got the single, the advanced single of Starting Over with Kiss 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 on the B side. And I walked in the office and they had just opened it in the mail, and they just relinquished the headphones to me because they knew I had to hear Yoko's song. And then I turned it over, and John's song is great too.
Hmm.
But I grew with that. And then the way I connected with her was I began writing to her when they moved into the Dakota and I had an address. And I was about 13, 14. And I would just keep saying to her, oh, I want to come to your concert at this club tonight, but I can't get in. Or I love this album and this song and this artwork. And did you mean this? And did you mean that? And she's like, oh my God, you understand it. Yes, this is great. And back then, nobody was speaking to her about her own work,
Right.
right? It was always Beatles or John. So that was great. And she'd always write back, and we kept that up for a while. And then they went into their quiet period, right? So I didn't bother them.
Mhm.
And I didn't even realize people were going there and getting autograph, standing out the Dakota to meet John. And I thought that was kind of, I don't know, never did it. But then after John was killed, my friend convinced me that she said, Yoko needs to meet you because she knows, this correspondence I had and all. So I said, all right, but I'm only going to go there on her birthday because I don't want her to think I'm some Beatle fan. So we did that. I think it was 1984 or 5.
Hmm.
And she ended up coming out pretty much right away. And I gave her a birthday present and I told her who I was. And she's like, oh my God, it's you. And without blinking, she just said, I'm having this exhibition of John's work this week. You have to come to this one. And then next week I have my own over here and that one and that one. So I went to all those exhibitions. I'd meet her though at those. Then the concerts, I would be backstage at, the concerts with her. And it was really fantastic.
Oh, so you're a true fan, which is very good. I mean, it's good qualifications for writing a book.
Mhm.
I'd have to say that I probably am a true fan myself. I don't know if I would ever write a book about her because I'd leave it to someone like yourself that is. corresponded with her personally, but I was about 50 feet from her once when they did a Lennon show in San Francisco. And it was like a musical play.
Mhm.
And she showed up, and I, you know, everybody was around her with all her people and everything, but you know, she was about 50 feet, and I just kind of waved, and she waved back, you know, everything like that. So, and then I have seen her in concert a couple times, so you know,
Mhm. Well,
um,
I try in the book, I pretty much lay it all out, all the lies that have been told, and I back up all of my debunking of these lies with facts and quotes and dates. And the whole thing fit together like a jigsaw puzzle.
you
And
know.
if you're a Beatles fan and you really want to know more about the whole situation, it's all in there and it's fascinating.
Mhm. Yeah, I think for me, I was probably when I became a Beatles fan around 1977, and you know I knew of them before that, and I knew of Yoko Ono and things like that. I have to admit, initially I thought the old stereotypical thoughts, oh, she broke up the Beatles or whatever,
Mhm.
and all she does is scream on all her records. Um, that sort of changed for me as I started branching out and buying the solo albums and things like that. And I'm one of the few that actually enjoys some time in New York City and things like that. And I said, well, I think she's done some solo albums, but this is like late 70s, early eight, well, late 70s or yeah, early 80s too. It's like, but they were all out of print, you know, so I couldn't hear them. And I remember, I think she did a concert around 81 or 82 or something, very shortly after John. Maybe it was a little later than that, but it
Mhm.
was also in San Francisco. And somebody in line was a hardcore fan, and he says, "I have every album," and that's really hard to do.
Oh,
And so at that point, it was like my, you know, I gotta find these albums. I mean, there must be something on it. It can't be constant screaming. You know, there's got to be
no.
something of value on this.
Most people
Um,
don't know she has all kinds of music styles on almost on every album that's just so varied.
right. And when I did finally get all her albums, and then later when they reissued them as CD, it made it easier to get everything. um, I found that I really love Approximately Infinite Universe. I think that's her masterpiece, if you would call it that.
It's one of my
Um,
favorites, hence the book title too.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so that's what I was going to ask you yourself. You know, what do you think is some
The
of her best
Infinite
work?
Universe of
Mhm,
Yoko Ono is the subtitle. So
mhm.
what do I think of what? The absolute
What do you think is her best work, and why, if it is something a little,
music wise?
yeah, music wise, or anything
Yeah,
she's
I
done?
would say, well, it depends what you want. You want to go crazy, you got Yoko Plastic Ono Band. It's so cool. I mean, Sean Lennon says about that album, he says, she comes from not having a background in rock and roll at all to inventing punk rock. I mean, it's just incredible.
True.
And then I love the next one was, Fly,
Hmm.
which was double. And there's equally, ambient pieces pretty much on there, a lot of avant-garde, and then the rockers. So she's got
Hmm.
a great variety on there. And then Approximately Infinite Universe is double as well. So she's a couple albums up on John as far as creativity on solo albums up until, later on. So yeah, those three I really love. And then of course, Season of Glass is stunning. I wish it didn't
Hmm.
have to exist because I wish John was still here.
Yeah,
But a lot of those songs were actually written in the early 70s.
that's true. Yeah. Yeah.
Very eerie, like they almost like the story unfolds right there. It's really strange.
Hmm.
Um, and then even her two most recent albums, Between My Head and the Sky and Take Me to the Land of Hell, those were fantastic too. So, I mean, out of it all, I mean, everything she did with John, this some of it, I would say it's all right. It is very hard to listen to because that's one of the second thing that came out after he passed away. So a lot of those songs are kind of sad to me, even though she's trying to be upbeat.
Right.
but yeah, it's all good. I mean, there's something for everybody, really. But
Right.
unfortunately, a lot of people don't give it a chance.
Right. I've actually turned a few people onto Yoko Ono just by making like CD compilations, and I'll put together what I feel are her best tracks, and I leave out stuff that might be considered offensive or whatever, where she's just really screaming, and then they
Well,
go,
there are some ballads that she has that
uh,
if Barbara Streisand sang them, they'd be hits. I
yeah,
mean, beautiful stuff, lyrics and music.
yeah. I,
Um,
I think one of her best songs ballad wise is probably Mrs. Lennon. I think,
oh,
that's a beautiful
stunning.
song. And it's like, it could have been a hit in a different world, I suppose. But, I don't know. I guess Walking on Thin Ice would probably be the closest of having a hit other than some of her later dance records, I guess, made it to number one in the dance charts and things like that.
Well, she
Yeah.
wasn't thinking in terms of hits. She was just,
Yeah.
expressing herself, and she had a classically trained background, and
Mhm.
she arranged the music. She told the musicians how she wanted it to sound. People think, John just laid everything down for her and gave it all. But she was very adamant. She didn't want John co-writing anything because then they would think it was his song. And she just remained steadfast and independent when it came
Mhm.
to.
What about her other types of projects? I mean, her writings and her art exhibitions and various things. What has appealed to you the most there?
She has an exhibition on right now at the Tate Modern. It's a
Mm,
huge retrospective, and it's getting such amazing reviews. People are walking through her white spaces, interacting with the art, getting the messages, interpreting it their own way if they want to, and they're saying, "Wow." A lot of the headlines are like, she's out of the shadow of John. The Beatles are an afterthought. It's just they're saying, whoa, this is what she was about. Now that they're opening their minds to it, they're seeing she's really, all her messages in her work are about healing.
mhm,
Uh, and she's a humanitarian, basically. She's very generous. She's always been giving to charities anonymously, so that's why a lot of people don't know about it. She's given to friends and family. She's just very giving. And even with John, she's very giving to his fans because she feels an affinity with them. And we all had the same loss in a way, even though it was her husband. This
mhm,
was someone that people cherished. And so she's always trying to perpetuate his legacy and give us a new release every few years. And we've got the Mind Games box set coming out in the
right.
summer. And she sits with the engineers and works with these things and makes sure they're the way John would have wanted them to be. Sean is a big help with that. So, her work is really interesting. Her mind is, if you meet her, you know why John really appreciated her. She's kind of mystical in a way, and she's very
Mhm.
intuitive. She's brilliant, and she comes from a whole different place. She sees other dimensions. We're living in our neighborhood. We go to the post office. We have our neighbors, our friends, our school. But
Mhm.
she's like, maybe we take a trip to Europe, and she's like, she sees a billion universes.
Mhm.
She knows the extent of possibility, and she thinks we're very limited, and that we all have a sixth sense and a seventh sense, and we're not even using all of our three senses correctly. And our values are completely misplaced. And she'll always say, water's more valuable than gold. And did we ever think about that? I
Mhm.
mean, it's so obvious to her.
Right.
Um, and a lot of it is based on negative space. She has this installation called Half a Wind, and it's all these objects. It's a white room with all the objects in it, furniture and everything cut in half. And we're seeing the half that's there, but she's really showing us the half that's missing
Hmm.
because there was a lot missing from her life when she created that. So, she has a whole different approach and a whole different way of seeing things. She's way ahead of her time, but people are kind of catching up now.
Right. This art exhibition you're talking about, is there is it all older pieces she's shown in the past on other art exhibitions, or is there some new stuff? Or
There's
because I
some
know since she's in her 90s, I don't know how active she is
Yeah,
nowadays.
no, she's not very active, but there's a few recent things, but it's basically a retrospective of,
Okay.
all her past work. And
Mhm.
it's really incredible. It goes up to maybe 2016. She had a big one at MoMA, Museum of Modern Art in the city in 2015, and it's similar to that one.
Mhm. And did she just keep up doing artistic projects like that, like her whole career, even if she didn't have an exhibition going on, just
Oh yeah.
for her own interest? I guess basically, because I mean, if
For
she's
her
not showing it,
interest,
what would she do it for?
well,
You know?
for peace, for her interest, for
Mhm.
she was basically an activist as well. She was always on the front lines of, campaign, Women's March, the anti-fracking, she was always culturally aware and doing whatever she could to further world peace, basically.
Mhm. Now, in your book, there, how is it organized? I actually haven't seen the insides too much, so you have to kind of explain it. Is it just her life story and a biography, or do you follow a special format or anything like that?
Well, it was a bunch of short stories I had written.
Okay.
So, and it's really cool because the way it fit together, like you can really read one chapter and it's a whole story, and you can put it down and pick it up anywhere you want and read. So I don't know. I mean, if you want to see the chapter headings, they're
Oh,
there's a lot more. There's 3 pages of
okay.
contents. It's
Mhm.
it's chronological, but it is and it isn't. It's just everybody's like loving it. They're saying it's so refreshing. You can keep it
Mhm.
at your bedside and keep, reading. And when they're done reading it, they reread their favorite passages. There's a lot
Okay.
of quotes from Yoko. There's a chapter all about just the war is over posters and
Mm.
how they were designed and created and what they meant and how they were distributed. So yeah, there's everything. There's a whole chapters about the Plastic Ono Band. There's chapters about every album and every song, and they're not shoved in the back like a discography. They're in within
Right.
the story where they belong.
Mm.
There's
Okay.
the love story with John. There's the murder of John and how she dealt with that. And but it's written in a way that it comes from the fact that they were a family. This is not just a celebrity death or John, the legend. It's really about what they were doing at the time and how it unfolded. And, you know, although they were living in peace and they were very happy together, there was a lot of turmoil. There were kidnapping threats, extortion, people stealing from them. It was just a horrible nightmare. So, but then there's beautiful stories like just about how she uses nature in her work.
Hmm.
Um, a piece about all of her films, piece about, every artwork is explained, which she never really explained. She wanted you to interpret it, but she
Yeah.
did have a reason and a meaning behind everything. And they're incredible,
Yeah.
you
I've
know.
noticed, I remember seeing the Mike Douglas shows, and she'd have a few different little items like the smile box. And Mike
Right.
Douglas would say, "Well, why did you do this?" And then she'd have to explain herself. She really wasn't very comfortable doing that. She
Mhm.
wanted it to kind of speak for itself and figured it
Right.
was kind of obvious. But, I get it. He's an interviewer, he wants to know. But, I think most of her work does speak for itself, I should say. Um, some things are a little bit obscure, but they're kind of an interesting idea, like the one that is kind of known called cut piece, where people come onto the stage and cut off pieces of her clothing, things like that. But I
Right.
guess there was a significance and a reason for that beyond the obvious of just sitting there, getting disrobed by people cutting off pieces of clothing.
Yeah, well, people think there's a feminist aspect to that. And she
Mhm.
says that she didn't really think of that until years later. But it really was for her was it was a vehicle to be giving because she saw that most artists put up something in front of you and said, this is it, this is what I'm giving you. But she wanted to actually have people take a piece of something um, and and interpret the whole thing the way they meant to, but it was based on the Buddha and his selflessness and how he gave and gave.
Mhm.
And of course, people grabbed the scissors and pretended that they were going to stab her. There's the element of danger there.
Right.
And, she thought of it as a ceremonial gesture.
Hmm. Now, the interesting thing, and there's interviews with both John and Yoko saying that they are basically shy, yet they both did things that drew attention to them. Did you ever talk to Yoko about that or ask her about that? That kind of paradox of her career, that she does things that draw attention to her at the same time she says she's
I
very
didn't ask her
shy.
because I knew it was just natural for her to
Yeah.
just, it was just she was driven to do the work.
Uh-huh.
Um, but with John, the attention was on them anyway. So they were
True.
just, okay, if the attention's on us, let's talk about peace. Let's do a bet-in. Let's do, speak out against the war. And they did those things. I mean, they didn't have to draw attention to themselves. It was all following them. They
That's
couldn't get
true.
away from the media.
That's true. And I know John did say that in some interview somewhere along the line that, yeah, it's like they're going to follow us to our honeymoon anyway. We might as well make it a useful statement, something to that effect.
Mhm.
Um, your book came out at the same time as another book, which I also have not read. I'm sorry, I'm not up on my Yoko Ono books. Is Yoko Ono an Artful Life? Have you seen that book, and how does your kind of compare or contrast with that one?
Well, a comparison is basically that's a much shorter book. And
Okay.
he's an art critic, so he is pretty much comparing her to the other artists and her. It's not really her life story like this,
Okay.
nothing about the music really, or nothing about, you know, yeah, he mentions John a lot, but it's not really in the same context as mine.
Okay. I figured you might have seen those. So, and then there's another one coming out. I don't know if you've seen it because it's coming out soon. I don't think is Yoko Ono, Music of the Mind, and it
Oh,
purports
that's
to be the
the
first biography, but I don't know.
No, that's the it's at the exhibition at the Tate.
Oh, okay.
It's
Oh,
really basically focused on art as well. It's kind of
okay.
like the catalog for that exhibition.
Okay. And then how does this exhibition, because I have this book, my one sole Yoko book other than Grapefruit, which is her book, is this giant oversized book called Yes. And that was in conjunction with an art exhibition. So how does that one differ from the current one going on?
That one was at Japan Society.
Okay.
And that had a lot of the older material in it too, but that's heavily contextualized within it's like a critical assessment of her
Hmm.
work, which, and to tell you the truth, as a fan of hers and as loving her, everything about her,
Hmm.
reading those books is, I'm like, oh, this is good, they're gonna be great. And I get through one paragraph and I'm like, wait, what are they saying? I'm confused. I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I'm bored.
Yeah.
So, I want a story. I want the
Yeah.
real truth. I want her voice. Her voice is in this book so, so much. And I've
Okay.
got Paul McCartney speaking of it, Phil Spector. I didn't interview them, but I've collected all these pieces from the time as I was
Right.
growing up. And I took pieces of what they were saying to illustrate her situations and her story. So that's what it
Yeah,
is.
it sounds like a good book to get, yours.
I
Because,
mean, Sean loves it. Like her colleagues are loving it. I got people who worked on her films are saying, "Oh my God, I didn't know the meanings of these films. I worked on these things. This is incredible." And her, her family, her daughter and her grandson have it, and
Mhm.
it's just, I think it's touching all the right people. You
Okay.
know,
Yeah, because sometimes I hesitate on things, and strangely enough, long before I ever was introduced to you, I had your book in my uh, wish list or whatever on Amazon, and it just sits there. And then something comes up, and I buy something else, and I said, I wonder if this Yoko book is good or not, because I really want a good book that kind of tells a story. I mean, I mentioned that one called Yes. That's a good picture book, but yeah, I don't particularly care for the text all that much in that one,
yeah, it's too
so
much.
but
But
as a
yeah,
good nice
read the
coffee
reviews.
table book of her stuff, it's good for
Right,
that.
right. So read
So,
the reviews of my book. I mean, and who's reviewing it? Like Elliot Mintz, their close friend, he calls it a masterpiece.
mhm,
Dan Richter, who was their assistant, John and Yoko's for 10 years, he's
okay.
like blown away by it. So yeah, it's got good credibility. And Olivia Harrison recommended it on Instagram.
Mhm.
David Frick, formerly of Rolling Stone, now of Sirius Radio. He's like, raving about it. So, um, yeah, it's a special book. I self-published because
Hmm.
they wanted me to cut it in half. I couldn't cut her life in half to
Yeah.
200 pages, no way.
Hmm.
So, because every part of it is interesting. I didn't put anything in here that's not really interesting.
Hmm.
So it's very different, and I think it's what fans would love to. Like when people research a book too much, it becomes too clinical. I like it to be,
Yeah.
passionate and fun.
Yeah.
That's what I
Well,
do.
I think you sold me on it, so I will definitely pull it out of the wish box and get a copy. What was I going to ask? Oh, this is for basically Beatles fans or Lennon fans that aren't necessarily Yoko fans, or they might want to be. What would you say? And there's no right or wrong, but what would you say that people should expose themselves to kind of enter into the world of Yoko Ono if they're not really knowledgeable of anything she's ever done other than being John Lennon's wife?
Other than reading the book, because
Yeah,
that's
well,
explaining all of it, there's,
hmm.
lies were written about her ever since she was with John to
Hmm.
sell papers, basically. Um, and she's just a beautiful person. I wouldn't have written this if I didn't feel like she really needed to be heard. But to tell them what to, I mean, they're not going to listen to her music, right? Because there is stuff there for everyone, but other than the music, go to the exhibitions, you
Hmm.
know, read some of her pieces that she's written, like just some of her, just look up Yoko Ono writings, Yoko Ono sayings, her Twitter messages. They're so helpful and beneficial and healing. She's so wise. It's like having a guru, who's being ignored. She's really, really got a lot of great messages that really would help everyone in their life.
Very cool. Now, the best way to get copies of this book?
So the best way that I would prefer is you got it from me, which is conceptualbooks.com. And you have the option of getting hardcover, softcover. This is the hardcover, and getting it signed by me if you
Okay.
want. And the softcover is on Amazon, and it's also on bookbaby.conceptualbooks.com.
Hmm.
If you go into the store, they can order it, and yeah, it's around. It's available.
Hmm. And I know you've appeared on other podcasts and other interviews and things like that. I saw your website again, but are you making any appearances yourself of selling them in person or anything like that at this
Well,
time?
I did some library talks. I'm trying to arrange a few more things.
Hmm.
The website is inyourmindsbook.com, and you can see the library talk on there. You can read excerpts, you can read reviews and see pictures and other podcasts I've done. So it's all on there, lots of stuff.
All right. And then, of course, the inevitable question, you've written a book. Are you planning to write another one? And if so, what topic sounds interesting?
Well, my blog, people are loving the blog because it's by a rock fan about rock and roll. So they're all saying, are you going to do a book? So I'm going to try to compile that, and it's probably going to be an ebook because
Hmm.
it's massive. There's so much. That's what I'll work on.
All right, very cool. Did you have any other definitive statements or anything else to say about Yoko before we go, or
Give
anything else to
Yoko a
say about the book?
chance. Give
What?
Yoko a chance. I mean, this is John's been telling you all your life that she was his savior. She nurtured him. She helped him be himself. And if you don't believe him, then who are you going to believe? Right?
Very good. Okay, well, I want to thank you, Madeline Bocaro, for being my special guest.
Thank
I'm
you.
definitely going to get a copy of the book, and I do like hardcovers, so I'll probably order it directly from you, like you're saying.
Right.
So, so,
Okay.
and anyway, I want to thank you again for being a guest on the Fun Ideas podcast. And this is your host, Mark Arnold, and we will see you next time.
Thanks.